So within our group of followers, there is a functional character known as a follower. Typically, in a large litter size, we are going to have more than one followers, and we can have a lot of followers. We can have 2, 3, 4, even more. A follower is an individual that I highly recommend to a first-time dog owner, or again, someone who is changing breed. Not necessarily because they are easy, but they can be easier than other functional characters and also less forgiving. But they come with their own characteristics and their own needs. One of them, as a follower, is that they can require a lot of reassurance. They're not necessarily a fearful dog or an anxious dog. They just really need a lot of reassurance to know that they're doing good and they're doing well. As the name would suggest, as a follower, they are going to be more of that dog that is going to follow us around the house. A dog that may suffer worse with things like separation anxiety. But if we do things correctly, safely, and with the knowing of how we can safeguard that functional character within its home, then the issue of separation anxiety may quickly diminish or may not even be seen. These dogs are caring, lovable, affectionate individuals. In terms of your 5-element theory, we would class them as earth element. A defender tends to be one of the largest pups in the litter. A follower can also be one of the largest pups as well. But when we compare them in stature and stance, we can see two striking differences. Our defenders are big and strong and confident, and they stand quite solid. Our followers tend to be quite lazy, tired, sluggish, and seem to just kind of carry puppy fat rather than be strong and bold. A follower as a functional character really doesn't have any responsibility. It really does wait for instruction. If you want to go for a 10-mile walk, the follower will follow you. If you want to stay in the house all day, they'll stay in the house all day with you. Followers are quite lazy, and they're very, very opportunistic around food. Now, of course, all dogs are going to be, but it's almost they have this love for food, this desire for food, and they never really seem to be full. Now, sometimes this can get them into trouble, particularly when we live in multiple dog households. So how we can identify a follower from a litter of pups is actually also quite easy. Often they're the pup that is going to have an interest in us as a stranger, but that interest is going to fade quite quickly, because either they'll want to go and look for food, or they'll, more importantly, want to have a sleep. They're the individual that, so long again as they feel safe, they're really laid back. They are happy to sleep in any position so long as they feel comfortable. And so again, I bring in that grooming behaviour when I'm trying to identify a follower. I love this photograph because a lot of people think it's a toy and it's a real life puppy. This is me choosing a puppy for a human that is a first-time dog owner. And because of that, I wanted to choose a follower for them. As you can see in this photo, so long as the follower feels comfortable, so long as the follower feels safe, they're happy to just lie in your arms and stay there asleep. Unlike the guide, that would be squirming and really trying to get out of that position as we're holding that individual. From this position in that photograph, again, I would replicate that grooming behaviour like I've already described. I would see and feel the behaviour that that individual was given back to me. And what you'd often find with a follower is that they really would just melt in your arms as you start to lick around that puppy's face. They really enjoy grooming and being groomed. It's another sign of affection for them. It makes them feel safe, it makes them feel rested, it makes them feel relaxed. So there would be a looseness and a softness within your hands as you start to groom that pup. And often a follower and another functional character that isn't necessarily a guide can start to mimic that grooming behaviour back to you as well. This is a situation that happened with me when I worked with the wolves. That's one of the wolves in that photograph at the top there, who I work with. That's our wolf that was a follower. And when I talked about the guide and this feeding arrangement, depending on how a prey animal is being killed, sometimes as a follower and an individual who's opportunistic, this wolf would get a food source by accident or by chance that he shouldn't have had. And he would show a very interesting behaviour every time this happened, and only ever when this happened. Whenever this wolf got a food source that he shouldn't have, and it was most notably something like the liver or maybe a couple of the kidneys, He would spend the next 3 days hiding in the den site. And then what he'd do is that when he needed to come out to go to the toilet, he would become very cartoon-like in his behaviour. He would peer out the den site, he would skulk towards the water trough, jump in the water trough and poo and wee in that water trough. A very unusual behaviour that he only ever exhibited when he'd eaten a food source that, to me and my understanding, he shouldn't have. Why is he doing that? What's he doing it for? To disguise his scent. I've already talked a lot about scent and how dogs can use this for communication and understanding in terms of functional characters. By going to the toilet in the water, his scent gets diluted in the hope that the rest of his group composition cannot identify and smell the food source that he has consumed. Unfortunately, it would still come out in his fur, so he would still get corrected, not by the guide, but by the enforcer. I only ever saw this behaviour every time this wolf, who's a follower, got a food source that isn't appropriate for its functional character. It's something to bear in mind, again, when we are mixing our dogs, mixing their group compositions, in multi-dog households, at parks, at dog daycare. Because again, communication is fluid. Again, it highlights the importance that food has and its role in communication with our dogs as these ancient canines. It's this indigenous blueprint that they have and in group composition. Followers are classed as backups. They are part of group composition to basically make up group numbers, which is why they don't really have any responsibility unless something is asked for them. They're there in the background just saying, hey, I'm hanging out, if you need me, come give me a shout, and I will support you in protecting. I will support you in defending. I will support you in hunting. I'll support you in whatever way a functional character may need support. But they're kind of a no questions asked kind of guy. What can happen in certain group compositions is that breeding conflict may arise because followers most often than not, although it can happen, are not going to be reproducers. Now, sometimes what can happen is conflict can arise to do with reproduction. For example, we have two males coexisting. One's a follower, and for argument's sake, say this other individual is a guide. Followers can get bullied. They can almost get picked on by other individuals if a follower is not neutered, and it spends a lot of its time, or it coexists with other individuals, or other males as this example, that have been neutered. Again, from a social canine perspective, desexing our dogs can interfere with natural communication and the flow of that. It takes away the ability for an individual to communicate through scent that it is able and capable of reproducing or not. So often what I find is that if we have followers that are entire and they spend a lot of their time with other males or females that have been neutered, then that can cause conflict. And what is important to say, again, it does vary from context to context, so I'm not saying this is an absolute, but just as an example, is often in my experience and often in my work, where there are dogs living together, and let's again take that example of male dogs, and there is an aggressor within that household. It is the aggressor that has been chosen to be neutered, in the hope that by neutering that individual, it will reduce that level of aggression or take it away altogether. But depending on the functional character and the group dynamics, sometimes it is best to neuter individuals that are not aggressing because they equally are able to advertise that it can reproduce, and it might be that they're living with an individual that is the true reproducer, and that is where the conflict is coming from. If we then make the mistake of neutering the aggressor, then it is going to make conflict and aggression and tension within that group composition more heightened. Because followers are also backups, sometimes they can get themselves into trouble. What I mean by this is that if they live and coexist with a certain group composition, they really will look into supporting the individuals in that group composition. It might be that an individual within their group composition is playing with another individual in the park, in a dog daycare, or a different environment. It might be in that play that an individual from his group, from the followers group, does a bit of a yelp because it accidentally has a paw trodden on, and a follower can come in as a backup and then protect and defend the individual that belongs to his group. There is no need for this conflict to rise, and then we run the risk of a potential fight breaking out. So followers generally are quite placid and safe and easygoing individuals. But if they feel that there's an individual in their group, or if they sense there's an individual in their group that needs support, then sometimes they can go in with their gun, then sometimes they can go in with guns blazing, and that creates conflict that wouldn't have necessarily arisen. We can teach a dog anything, so long as we do it correctly, safely, and most importantly, in a dog's own time. And I've already talked about within the canine wellness section of this course. It just so happens that within our functional characters, the sharpness and speed of how an individual learns can vary. And I'm going to give you an example of this in terms of our followers. We know that our guides are sharp, that we can show them something once and they can pick up really quickly, and we can make things more and more complicated in a relatively short space of time. With our followers, if we did that, we really would run the risk of upsetting them, of making them just feel concerned, of making them feel rushed, panicked, and not wanting to learn. A really basic example that I'm going to tell you about is something that I saw in my own dog, Cola, who's a natural follower. With Tunkasila, my guide, I taught her target in a relatively quick space of time. I was then able to move my hand around no matter where I was in that environment. It came to me teaching the same thing to Cola, and he picked up the concept of target relatively quickly. So long as I was asking him to touch, he knew that his nose had to touch my hand and he got the reward. And so he got that. But when it came to moving my hand just a little bit further away from where my hand originally started from, and I asked for that touch, he looked at me in a little bit of panic as if to say, "Oh, I don't get it." And that's the difference then we're working with. It made me laugh, it made me smile, and I love teaching Cola things because he learns at such a slower speed than what Tunkasila does. And it's a great comparison for me. And so we had to spend longer teaching Cola some very simple tasks. It took him a while to grasp that all I wanted from him was exactly the same thing when my hand was there compared to there. And with your followers, once they get it, they get it. It's just the part of them getting it that can take a little bit longer. And hopefully this is starting to make sense now why functional character is important. If I expected all of my dogs to learn at the same speed as Tunkasila, I am letting them down. I am setting them up to fail. I am running the risk of maybe getting frustrated or impatient with Cola. And again, from an emotional and biochemical perspective, that's equally then starting to affect him. By recognizing him as a follower, I work very different with him. We slow things down and I allow him to work in his own time with the pressure off. When he gets something, he gets rewarded, he gets praise, and he feels great. But if I was to rush him, force him to do something, or try and quicken that speed, that is going to cause confusion for him, and that is going to break my relationship between me and him. That relationship of harmony, balance, trust, guidance, and value. And I always say that followers are good medicine. This isn't necessarily a biological phrase or an accurate phrase. It's just the way that I see a functional character. They're a good soul. They're kind, they're caring. They just want to make sure that you're always okay. They always want to make sure that they're doing a good thing. And it's really important to offer that to them.